4 years after most of us began using video call tools like Zoom for our meetings, workers are discovering that we are still not very good at these types of calls. A new survey suggests that video meetings are also creating anxiety and fatigue, and we still have etiquette issues. So we're going to try to figure out why we're so bad at video calls and see if there are better solutions on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Sylvia Johnson. She is the head of methodology at Preply. Welcome to the show, Sylvia. And you're coming to us from Spain.
I am. So, welcome. Thank you for having me here. So, I'm head of methodology here at Preply, and we are just fascinated to share some of these findings from our survey with you.
All right, so the company recently surveyed more than 1,300 Americans about how they express themselves on work calls and how they feel about them. And the results show that not only do video calls create anxiety and fatigue, but that also many of us are still not very good from an etiquette standpoint. So just to jump off, how much time are Americans spending on video calls per week?
So according to a survey, it's around 5.5 hours per week. So round about one call per day.
Right. And earlier this week, I had three calls on one day. And I don't actually have a lot of calls. I mean, we do pre-calls for the show where we talk to people, but in terms of the meetings, I know other coworkers here that probably have 3 to 4 video calls per day, which adds up to, 10 to 15 a week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to say today here is a non-meetings Thursday. I think you are my 5th meeting and you are my 4th Zoom call. So yes, I think that was one of the surprising findings to me, that it was only 5.5 hours per week.
And we've heard that companies are setting up like no meeting days, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you said before, we are all so fatigued. We spend so much of our time on video camera. And so a lot of companies are seeing that there's not enough time to do any kind of focus work because you're constantly in meetings. I mean, don't get me wrong, this used to happen before Zoom calls, you used to spend all your time in in-person meetings. But now, because so many of us are working from home, then I think it's much easier for people to say, I'll just put 10 minutes on your calendar. I'll just set up a quick Zoom call. And before you know it, you've got no time at all for real work.
Yeah, quick Zoom calls for me are usually 30 minutes. And I don't know if I would have done that in an in-person meeting day. That's how long a lot of these things end up. So let's talk about some of the findings of the survey that might make people go, that's interesting or surprising. What were some of the more surprising results from the survey? Or if you want, I can just jump through them and then ask you questions.
Well, I'm fine. I mean, what I think surprised me the most was 48% of the people we surveyed have hyper gaze anxiety.
Yeah.
Now, for those who don't really know what hypergaze anxiety means, it's basically sustained eye contact. So you think back to in-person meetings. So quite often you're looking around, and I'm going to do a little bit of looking around, as opposed to right now. You can see I'm staring right at you, and I'm not going to move my eyes from you. So this is this sort of the hypergaze. People staring right at you at the screen for the entire meeting. And believe you me, it's exhausting having so many eyes looking at you. So this is one of the things that people they just get a little bit more anxious in these meetings, knowing that everyone's eyes is on them.
Yeah, we're going to get to the etiquette part later, but since you brought this up, is that what people should be doing when they're on the video call? Should they be looking right at the screen and then not moving, or should they be going all around the place and looking this way, and this way?
So I think from an etiquette point of view, actually maintaining eye contact is really important, because you're conveying the message, I'm engaged, I'm listening to you. So I think it's more about you being aware that while people are staring at you through the camera, they're not really staring at you in a threatening way, in any way or form. In fact, what they're trying to convey is, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we're on this call. Let me smile at you a little bit more. Exactly. And I mean, we're going to talk about this in a little bit as well, like the whole body language as well. How do you show people you're engaged? So really, I think when you think about this hypergaze, don't think about it. Don't think about it as everyone's eyes on you. Just thinking about they're actually paying attention. That's their way of saying, I'm an active listener. And so it's great.
Yeah. Another part of the survey, you said that 46% have mirror anxiety. So can you explain what that means? Is it because you can also see yourself in these calls and you start focusing on what you're doing there?
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who has used Zoom before, but the first time you come face to face with your own image on video, you're like, oh, God, did I remember to brush my hair? Like if I only got one earring on in my case, sometimes has happened. So yeah, I think that being forced to look at yourself a lot, even if it's in a tiny little box in the screen, actually does cause this mirror anxiety. And there's actually been scientific evidence that this self-focused attention can really heighten your vulnerability and is going to make you a little bit more anxious. So there are ways of combating this. Once you get used to knowing that you're going to go, you can possibly add that preview button, preview my video before joining the meeting, just so you have a quick look, or just sort of be prepared knowing that you're going to be on camera at any moment, because sometimes you're going to be in meetings which are not planned and someone's just going to say, hey, can we just hop on a Zoom call?
Right.
And you just need to look a little bit professional.
Yeah. Usually what I do is, so I'm most self-conscious about my hair. So I always kind of do this whole thing before a call just to make sure that my hair looks right for me. But then I also get anxiety during calls sometimes if I've got like an itch and I'll do like something like this or itch my nose. And I was like, oh, should I do it? Should I itch the head, or are people going to think I'm weird if I'm doing something weird with my face?
So true, but also think if you were in a face-to-face meeting, you probably would do. I mean, you'd probably try not to do it too much to the meeting, but a little tiny moment of anyway, hang on a second, let us just continue. But this is a thing, right? So when you're on a Zoom meeting and you've got your camera on, are you looking more at the person who's speaking, or are you looking more at yourself? Because if you're looking more at yourself, then you're super conscious of whether your hands are moving. Right now I'm seeing my hands moving a lot, I'm very gestury, etc. Right. So I become really, really conscious of that. So I think the idea is, try not to do anything you wouldn't do in a face-to-face meeting, but it's okay to sneeze. For example, if you know you're going to sneeze, good etiquette. So either put yourself on mute, obviously nobody wants to hear that sneeze, but also you can quickly turn your camera off, a quick sneeze, and then you're back on and nobody's even noticed. So I think it's just being aware of what you want to share and what's probably best not shared.
Right. The biggest number in the survey was that 71% said that they exert energy in order to have good posture on a call. Are people finding that they feel like they have to sit up straight? And again, it's all this part of this paying attention and showing engagement and active listening rather than just me, it's like, oh, I'm going to be down here and just go. Yeah.
Completely. I mean, I think that 72%, 71%, they're like either sitting or standing. You have to exert energy to a certain extent, right, to maintain that posture. So if I don't think about my posture, then as you said, I'll probably sit back a little bit. It's also about positioning your laptop as well. So if you don't have the laptop camera at the right position, then you're constantly either trying to sit up to get your head in the middle or sit down, etc. And so again, I think it's so important. Like it's about conveying professionalism.
Yeah.
And so in a professional meeting, you're going to sit up straight. You're going to look like you're paying attention. But yeah, it is a little bit more tiring, and just to be aware of that.
And if people are
anything.
And if people are exerting energy, then we get, the next result was 49% are reporting that they feel more fatigued after a video meeting. And then if you start adding that up, that can lead to there was a lot of research over the last 4 years about Zoom fatigue and just so many meetings. And by the end of the day, if you've had three or four meetings, you're just like wiped out. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But I suppose if they had a lot of meetings during the regular day, I tend to get fatigued when I do multiple shows in one day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the whole back-to-back of the Zoom meetings as well.
Yeah.
So when you're in a meeting, when you're in a Zoom meeting in particular, so you need to be very aware of how focused you are. So you're trying to get rid of any background noise, and that itself is quite exhausting. Maybe you've got dogs or kids or whatever running around, or maybe there's just some work in the next door house. So you're kind of focusing on moving that about. You're focusing on making sure people think that you're engaged, that you're excited, and and then you're gesturing, and then you're doing everything that you would do in a face-to-face meeting. And you get more and more tired. I mean, we'll talk about it a bit later about the science behind that as well. But I just think in general, if you add up all of this, all of the anxiety you get, and even the anxiety about prepping for the meeting, I mean, especially if it's you presenting or you speaking, then you get more and more nervous as the time, like, am I prepped enough? But this is something you get even in a normal meeting. It just seems to be amplified a little bit more when it comes to Zoom meetings.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an anxiety even before, like, okay, does everyone make sure that the invite's right, that the link's right? Are people going to show up on time? If I'm clicking on a link and no one's showing up to the meeting, I was like, okay, did I screw up somehow? And that leads to anxiety as well.
Well, completely. Yeah. I mean, so you've got the worry about technical difficulties, right? So not everyone has the same kind of tech savviness that you and I might have because we spend so much time on these kind of calls. So what if my Wi-Fi suddenly drops? What if I can't get my mic to work? And quite often you feel that people don't, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, so people hadn't had any training on how to use Zoom or anything like that as well. So suddenly you were thrown into this whole new technology that you weren't really sure how to work. Nobody knew what was the required etiquette. I mean, sometimes what I try and do is to avoid the Zoom fatigue. I refuse to take 60-minute meetings. I'm like, no, let's have a 50-minute meeting. And then I know I've got 10 minutes between one and the other.
Yeah.
So I think there are ways of combating this fatigue. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people find it exhausting having more than one or two meetings in a row. And one of the other findings, which I thought was really interesting, was the whole smiling side of it. I don't know whether you remember seeing that data. So we saw that 48% of people are smiling more on Zoom calls, particularly female. And you're like, well, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And so when you think, is it a good thing? Well, if you're smiling, you're creating quite a positive atmosphere, right? Perhaps you're encouraging a little bit of connection and engagement. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to compensate for this lack of physical proximity. I'm just going to sort of show I'm really engaged.
Yeah.
But hey, that's exhausting. And also then it suddenly might come across as a little bit inauthentic as well. If you're feeling compelled to smile all the time. Exactly. Can you imagine? I'd be sat there going, and you're doing something really serious. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. That's so important.
I've discovered that.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah. I've discovered that through the use of this, which we do a lot of recordings on Zoom as well, but also in person. I find myself when I watch the shows later that when I smile, my eyes tend to close. And so I'm like, so now I try to keep my eyes open when I smile, and then it just comes off as creepy looking.
But then you see that's when you're suffering from that mirror anxiety.
Yes.
Sometimes you just need to take that away. You just need to think, no, this is me communicating very naturally. And if my eyes disappear while I smile, so be it.
One of the newer features that are being added to a lot of these calls are that they can be recorded, and sometimes they use it for AI transcription and things like that, so for transcripts of the call. But and I'm not sure if you asked this in the survey, but is there more anxiety if someone knows that the call is being recorded? Because sometimes with guests on this show, for example, they know that they're being recorded, and if they haven't practiced being on camera, this used to be more of an issue before we got to the whole Zoom call stuff. Are they more anxious because they might think that, well, if I say something, I might get fired because it's now being recorded and they have proof that I've said something?
Absolutely. So we didn't actually ask this in a survey, so I can just share a sort of my personal opinion. So I would say most definitely, because the meetings that tend to be recorded are quite crucial, super important meetings where you know that people have said, hey, can you record this? Because I want to go back and look at it and remind myself of it. Now with Zoom, you've also got the AI assistant that can basically take notes and so on. So of course, it's going to make you a little bit more nervous, knowing that your words, your facial expressions, your actions are going to be reviewed at any point. Yes, of course, there's the privacy concerns as well. You mentioned it before, if it's been recorded by it, what's going to happen to it? But yeah, I think that fear of sorry, I was going to say a word which then I thought probably can't say on a podcast. Slipping up. Slipping up's
Okay.
a great way of representing what I wanted to say. Yeah, so you feel like there's that fear of slipping up. Imagine there's a slip of the tongue, or there's a misunderstanding that you don't quite get. Oh, and it's just those high stake meetings that tend to get recorded. And so I would say most definitely. But also, I would say in general, the moment you know a camera is being pointed at you, even for a photo, like there's always a moment of freezing. Like, do I look?
Yeah.
Is this my? Which is my right profile? Is the left side or the right side a little
Right.
bit better? So I would say most definitely, people get more nervous when they know it being recorded.
Okay.
But I would also say, I mean, this could potentially apply to a face-to-face meeting as well, right? So yeah, we're talking about Zoom right now, but even when you're going to a face-to-face meeting, more than anything, people are taking notes of what you're saying. They're always going to feed it back to you. So if you prepare and you feel comfortable with it, then really knowing that it's going to be recorded shouldn't in any way affect what you're going to talk about, how
Right.
you're going to say it. Well, the only thing, or the only possible positive way it might affect you is it perhaps forces you to really think about the words that you're going to use and thereby communicate a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. There were a lot of stats in the survey that indicated that people were trying to act on a virtual call or a video call the same way that they would as if they were in person in a conference room. And is that important? Like if they're getting anxiety because they're trying to be more professional looking and having a meeting, I mean, they're expending all this energy. Wouldn't it be, if you could, wouldn't it be better if people were more casual maybe on some of these calls? Or do they feel like, well, if I show my casual side, my boss isn't going to think I'm serious enough? Or it becomes this like big loop of anxiety, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it depends. So there are certain meetings that you would do in person where you could be a little bit more casual. If you're just meeting with some colleagues to perhaps brainstorm something, then yeah, maybe you can be a bit more casual. But as a rule, I think I would say always try and sort of translate that professionalism, that decorum that you might show in a physical office to the virtual meetings as well. And again, we don't have data on this in the survey, but we did see that in general, that when you know you're going to be on camera, so you think at least about what you look like, you sort of try and put a professional image across as well. You think about how you communicate, you respectfully try and read people's body language in terms of knowing when they're going to finish, so you're not constantly interrupting them and so on. So I would say in general, like, keep with the professionalism.
Yeah.
Yes, allow for a more relaxed approach, but know your audience, like know who's going to be in that meeting with you, and then you can take that choice.
Yeah. Right. So here's the $1 million question. We've been, doing this for more than 4 years now. Most of us that are in the kind of the knowledge worker space. So why are we still seeing some of these issues around etiquette, and why are we still bad at this? Now, you might argue, or others might argue, that at least we're better than we were 4 years ago when people were showing up with pajamas on. There were people that had calls in their bedroom, and you saw like an unmade bed behind you. The old issue with dogs and children, obviously, there was a more of an acceptance back then because everyone was thrown into the situation. So at least I'm not seeing those issues on many of my office calls that I was 4 years ago. But there are still many other etiquette issues that still drive me crazy. Is it just, am I overthinking this, or do you think that that for the most part we're still bad? And if we are, why?
So no, it's a really good question. And when I was thinking about it, I was like, really, are we still as bad as 4 years ago? And I think overall, like, we have improved, but I still think that tech makes it sometimes very difficult for us to have a great video call. So you can be super prepared in terms of, okay, I know where my best internet connection is. And then suddenly, for example, your AirPods, like, they suddenly decide to stop working. So you're in a meeting and you're like, where's my sound coming from? And again, because you're not that tech savvy, then you don't really know how to go about solving that problem. So I think tech is always going to throw a spanner in the works, and sometimes we're just not really ready to deal with it. I think leading on from that, probably that inadequate training. So it would be interesting to do another survey about how many companies actually put their employees through Zoom training. How many companies bothered to say, okay, we're going to
I would
give
say
you a
0
10-minute.
or
Yeah.
0.
Yeah, I think that I would probably agree with you. I think they just expected people to get on with it. And so you've got everyone who's like, well, I kind of don't really understand how Zoom works. And for example, like the whole background thing, you talked before and you were like, well, do you remember when people would just turn up and you'd see a really messy bedroom or the kitchen or like the half open bottle of wine from last night's dinner on the side? I mean, it's happened. We've all seen it. And so people are like, oh God, but I don't have a white wall, because of course they'd read, oh no, you just need to have a plain white wall. Some people just don't have that. And so they were like, well, what can I do to my video? And so they weren't aware that there is actually a setting in Zoom, which I've got on right now, which is blur my background.
Yeah.
So fantastic. Or you could choose a virtual background. So for example, I might want to go to San Francisco for a little bit. So here I can choose different background.
Yeah.
I mean, I can also have no background. You can see I'm sat here in an office. So this, in fact, is a perfectly acceptable background. But just in general, I always prefer to have that blur background.
Yeah.
So again, it's not knowing enough about how the actual the technology works.
Like, is there a preferred choice? You have the preferred choice for blur, but is there? I mean, I suppose, should I write into Emily Post, if that even still exists, for, what's the preferred background? Because what bothers me is the lack of consistency around a Zoom call. So one person, you can see everything in their background. Another person, they're blurring. Another person, they're in San Francisco, or they've got the fake virtual background, and that just irritates me from a consistency standpoint. But again, I'm weird sometimes.
I think it's all about personal preferences, right? Like normally I have a company background which we use, and so I always have that. Otherwise, I prefer white, just because I think the lighting's better. I also suffer from mirror anxiety. I have to look at myself, and therefore I think, oh, does this white background make me pop? Does it make me look more professional, and so on? Also, when we go back to should we use the same levels of professionalism with Zoom calls as with in-person meetings?
Yeah.
A colleague of mine, who will go unnamed, he actually chooses a different background at the start of some of our team meetings, and it's a really nice icebreaker. Like, where am I today? And he chooses something from a television show, or he might choose something completely different. So I think you can pick and choose whatever Zoom backgrounds work for you, as long as you're not showing the mess behind you.
Yeah, okay. So you're okay with the non-consistency then?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And again, I'm all about knowing what works for you. And I think if it's about reducing the anxiety that you have.
Yeah.
So certainly for my team, I want them to feel comfortable. If I'm inviting them to a Zoom meeting, I'm taking some valuable time out of their day.
Right.
And I want them to feel comfortable. And so there are certain colleagues where, hey, if I see your background and I see your kitchen table, I'm fine with that. Well, if they were presenting to leadership or higher management, then I would expect them to be a bit more professional. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live just outside Barcelona. So there is a certain position at my table where you can actually see the sea behind me, which works really well sometimes. Nice talking point. Oh, is that the sea I can see?
Yeah.
And other people are like, why are you showing me that you live by the sea? That's not fair. So I think, again, it's knowing who you're with. And likewise, like when we think about the different filters that you can put on with videos, like, okay, let me choose a little filter. Let me choose one here.
Yeah, this gets into the whole goofiness factor.
Very random, right? Like this is something, I mean, do you remember like that famous judge case? So I think the guy was like dressed as a cat and
he couldn't
like that.
And he couldn't figure out how to
off.
turn it off, right?
Exactly. So I mean, I think things like that, like, again, sorry, I've kind of gone a little bit off, but my
Yeah, we'll
point
get
being,
there.
if you're trained to understand
Yeah.
how to use it, and what I really love now about Zoom in particular is they've just added reactions to Zoom as well. So you can, so in order to show how engaged you are with the person, so when I was doing that, you might have gone, hey, so look, ha ha ha. And so you've got these amazing smiley faces coming up. Fantastic. But that's something that you can do when you have a level of confidence and
Yeah, but
understanding with someone.
these seem to be designed. All of these gestures and emojis and the face filters, and you know, now there's some avatars and 3D visual where you can create like a 3D version of yourself if you're in a VR world. I mean, Apple has done this with the Vision Pro where you can have a disembodied head basically talking to you. It seems like those are designed for more casual or personal use, but I would say the large majority of Zoom calls are definitely business meetings or office meetings, and it doesn't feel like those are appropriate. A cynical guy like me, I was like, I just roll my eyes when I see that stuff, and a lot of people don't know how to turn them off because they're being turned on by default because these companies are going, look, we have new features, and this is please continue to use us. But it just seems to me like it's just a dumb idea from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit of a hangover from the pandemic
Yeah,
where we were having also fun calls. Like, I don't know about you, but I was doing pub quizzes with friends, we were doing meals. And so, therefore, it was quite fun to have all of
yeah,
those. But I would 100% agree with you in a professional setting. Like, you don't want to feel uncomfortable with any feature that your technology might throw up. If you can't turn it off, it's embarrassing, it's annoying, and it's just going to make the whole experience so much more unpleasant.
yeah,
So I would say, in general, absolutely. Like reactions, like the one I showed you, fine, good. It's also a way for me of communicating, especially if I'm in a presentation or something and we're talking about, well, the presenter is talking about something which I'm like, oh, that's such a good point. So I might put something in the chat box or I might like leave a little heart just so they can see, hey, like, I think it's nice to have that encouragement
yeah,
because if they were doing it in person, I'd be sat there going, like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you really would be encouraging them. It just, okay, maybe not quite that much, but yes, absolutely, you'd be encouraging. You'd want them to, you'd want to show them that they were doing a really good job, and you want to encourage them because,
yeah.
of course, like people's fear of public speaking is already off the charts, and the
Right,
people in
right.
public speaking Zoom way off the charts.
I wanted to get to two other stats that and or stuff from the survey. I'm going to combine these. So 32% said that they get up and exit the frame during a call, and then the other one I wanted to ask you was about when you have people that then either mute themselves all the time or they turn their camera off. It's from an etiquette standpoint, it's always weird to see a call where I'm willing to put my face in the Zoom call, but then I have other people and I just see either a static image or just their name. And I feel like, well, wait, you don't even want me to see you. Is that an etiquette thing? And I understand there are reasons why people might mute their camera. But I think before the show when we were talking, you mentioned a good idea for companies for this whole video on and off. And then get back to is it okay to get up and walk away, or does that just show disengagement?
Yeah, for me, that is really rude. I mean, for me, that is something that I would never do. So,
I guess if the house is on fire, yes, you should leave.
oh, of course, absolutely. And no, but no. But if the house is on fire, take time to unblur your background, move your camera around, show the house is on fire, and then you can walk off. Otherwise, unacceptable.
There you go.
No, but what I would always do if I have to leave the meeting, so there is a chat for a reason. So I will often write, hey guys, need to drop. Thanks so much. Catch up later.
Yeah.
With that, I then turn my camera off, I mute myself, and off I go. I think that's totally acceptable. I mean, also, if you've got a meeting in your calendar, you know how long it's going to last. And so, yes, if Amazon ring at the doorbell, I might sort of, again, go off camera, mute myself in the chat, BRB, be right back.
Yeah.
Off I go, open the door, and then come back. So I think it's about understanding how important you are in the sense up to the person who's talking to you. So obviously, if you're in a one-on meeting, absolutely fine. Say, hey, my doorbell's just rung. Do you mind if I just take 2 minutes? I have three daughters who phone at the most inopportune moments. And they're the kind of teenage kids who don't understand if I don't pick up. It's not because I don't want to talk. They just think, oh, she's not picking up. I'll just phone again, phone again, phone again. But I'm in a meeting. So I think there are moments there where it's actually sometimes quicker just to kind of go on mute, turn off camera, call you back, darling, and off you go.
Right.
So I think it's just about a little bit of respect and being polite.
Yeah.
To make sure that that you're not just walking out in the middle of anything.
So I want to get into another area of the survey, and I think this is what you're also an expert in as well, is that there are people that don't understand that there are some technology and cultural issues that coworkers may have, especially if you're in a global organization. Again, you're in Spain, so there's a slight lag between what I'm saying and what you're hearing. So, I'm trying not to interrupt because, you might think that I'm ready to go with my next question. But then there's also time zone issues where, it's currently, late in the afternoon, it's early morning here, or if you're in Japan, it might be 2 a.m. when they're jumping on a call. So how do workers and how do you get around that so that, if you're looking at me and it's 3 a.m. and you're just, oh God, another meeting with Keith. How do you get around that so that you don't create anxiety?
So that's a really good question.
It's just awareness of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're super international, right? Here at Preply, we've got offices all over. And so when I look to set up meetings with people, first of all, I check the time zone on their calendar. And I try and be as respectful as possible. If they're in the States and I'm in Spain, well, I'm like, okay, I can put something at the end of my day, which is early morning for them, but it's just about enough. Also, I'm very honest. Like if we were having this call at 10 o'clock at night, I would probably look a little bit more tired. So maybe I'd try and figure out how do I get my video filter to just, like touch me up a little bit and make me look a little bit more perky. So I think that you do have to understand that people are on these calls all the time. If you see someone who's looking a little bit less engaged, there are ways to bring them back as well in terms of communicating with them too. Then the language question is a really interesting one, right? Because especially a lot of our meetings are a combination of native and non-native speakers. So you have to be very aware as a native speaker, you are in a very privileged position. You also understand much more about their body language. You're reading the nuances a little bit more. You're having no problem processing the language as it's coming through. Well, for non-native people, so you've got the Zoom fatigue as is. So especially if you're getting late afternoon, they've had 4 or 5 of these calls. They're doing all of this in a second language. So they're translating and then they're translating and trying to have time to think of the right words to express the right answer to your question. I mean, it's really exhausting. So I find it's very, very important to be respectful, to understand that that person's not going to respond to you as quick as like, you and I are talking quite quickly right now.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of back and forth. But if you're a non-native, then I would probably be giving more pauses in order to allow you to perhaps ask for clarification, to interrupt me. I mean, and
there were some like cultural issues too, right? Like it's a cultural thing where some people won't. Oh, how do I put this? They are waiting for your answer, or they won't start talking until there's been a brief pause. Where I'm an American and we'll just interrupt whenever the hell we feel like it.
No, absolutely true. So this is called high context culture versus low context culture. So for example, a high context culture might be something like an Asian country, so perhaps Japan. So they don't speak as often as we do for fear of interrupting and appearing like selfish and individualistic. So, for example, you might have many great ideas, but you will always wait for me to say, so Keith, what do you think? Or Keith, we haven't heard from you. I'm really interested in your opinion. So you have to be a little bit more direct with them. Well, low context, US, for example, like you may not appreciate those subtleties. And so also one thing which is quite helpful, I find with low context countries, like they also find it quite useful to be updated before the call, or if they have like a bit of an informal agenda, then they tend to understand a little bit more what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
But sort of basically low context tend to focus on the words and being super direct, and high context is a little bit more that implicit communication with the onus on you to understand what is the context in a bit more detail. So yeah, so I think that the cultural, the language issue, the tech issue, I mean, it all adds up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing we ever have a successful Zoom call. Like, thinking about all of this, like, how are we even doing this?
So we've been talking for about 35 minutes on this already, and the first that I know that my director, Chris, is going to be like, I could solve all this with one answer. Just stop doing all these calls and get into the office and have your meetings in the office. Obviously, if there is an issue with a lot of anxiety for these things, one of the solutions is to try to have more in-person meetings and work around a lot of these. But there are cases where, especially if you're global and you've got a bunch of people calling in from different places, they can't get to a meeting. What other tips would you have to help try to reduce some of these anxiety issues that pop up? Do you have some ideas?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to what we were talking about before, having a no video meetings day. I think that's really, really important for people. So if you're working 5 days a week, like maybe choose a Wednesday or a Thursday and say, okay, no video meetings. Have guidelines on when to call a video meeting in the same way when to call a meeting, because quite often there are certain issues that can be solved very easily by email, on Slack, etc. You don't always need a video meeting. It's so tempting, because I think, again, in the pandemic, we were all feeling a little bit isolated. We sort of were craving that human contact. Mm-hmm. And so rather than spending 10 minutes on a message, you think, okay, let's just jump on a call. But I think that that's one thing you can definitely avoid. So know when the meeting is really necessary. Then think about the video side of it. So is the video really necessary? How important is it to you? And just say, hey guys, I'm fine if you turn your cameras off. Mm-hmm. No worries at all.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Do you think that
have mandatory meetings?
Do we think that video calls are now felt like it's a default setting, that, all right, if I'm going to have a meeting with you, I have to have my audio on, I have to have my video on. Whereas you could just say, let's just do a meeting, but it could just be audio only. Because it's more.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. You don't always have to see each other. I mean, sometimes it depends, again, on the nature of the conversation.
Yeah.
If it's perhaps a little bit more delicate, personally, I like to see who I'm dealing with, because also I like to check out their body language. I like to see how they're reacting to what I'm saying. I mean, it's also a trap we fall in, and I'm guilty of myself. Sometimes, rather than just phoning people, I'll FaceTime them. Why am I FaceTiming them? Again, it's that whole thing. I really don't need to see their face.
Right.
Just an audio call would be fine.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit about habit. But my third probably bit of advice for companies who are worried about fatigue is talk to your employees. Find out what it is that they find really tiring about Zoom calls, and then you can actually put in a plan to help them out. And most of them would just benefit so much from a little bit of training on how to use Zoom. That will remove so much of the anxiety around it, and you will have much more successful calls in the future.
Right. And then if they can look for alternatives of other forms of communication, whether it's chat or even, some companies that are still using email. I mean, obviously, a lot of these technologies that come out, they're supposed to replace other ones, but they end up not doing that. You end up now having communication, 6 or 7 different ways to communicate with people. And I think I could probably do an episode on how I'm screwing up in Slack, or why my email game is still off 30 years later. So it's not, it's weird that we're picking on a video or Zoom, for example, but there's lots of other ways that we communicate poorly.
No, completely. And I think Slack would be a really fascinating one. And so here we use Slack far more than email. So actually, if somebody sends you an email, you don't necessarily expect them to look at it. While Slack, because it's so instant, and then everyone creates 1,000 Slack channels, and you're like, where is the Slack etiquette? So I think regardless of what medium of communication you're using, a little bit of training goes a heck of a long way to ensuring that people are using it properly, using it for the right moments, using it for the right kind of communication, and getting the right tone and so on. I mean, also going back to one of the points I made earlier about the native, non-native, actually non-natives may well prefer something like Slack, because they can read it. in their own time. They're not desperately trying to understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of just being a bit more aware of what is the right kind of communication. What does that person need to know for me to make the Zoom meeting as efficient, as fast, and as straightforward for them as possible?
Yeah.
And that could be sharing what you're going to talk about in Slack, asking them to prep a little bit. Hey, I'm going to be calling on you for this. Oh, you said, I might send you over some questions. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. That's going to super help me, although I seem to be rambling on quite a lot of this. But like, it really, really does help. Like,
Sylvia, I have Slack anxiety, by the way. It's like we and again, we had a conversation with our team on Slack, and there was a new person who joined the company, and so they added him to the Slack channel. And a bunch of people that are really better at Slack than I am, they're like, hey, welcome, and then they start throwing in some GIFs or some GIFs or animated little things, and then I start getting anxiety. It's like, well, now I've got to find the perfect image, or I've got to find the perfect response to this, and then is it going to be funny? Is it going to be thought of as sarcastic? And I was like, you know what? I just decided not to do anything because I figured that that's probably better. So maybe we should do a whole episode on Slack anxiety, or no one will watch that either.
And the emojis. Like, what does the dancing penguin even mean? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Why have you left that for me?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, there was some research about, from a generational standpoint, where a lot of people were, if people of my generation or older were using the thumbs up emoji, to say, yes, I agree, or good job. And then people in the younger generations were worried about that, or they were triggered by it. And, of course, whenever I hear the word triggered, I'm like, here we go again. But they didn't understand that thumbs up meant good job. And they thought that thumbs up meant something else. Half the time, some of these emojis that come over, oh, God, I'm sounding like I'm 80. All right, I'm going to stop. Before.
No, but can I just tell you one funny thing? So one of my older colleagues who I used to work with, she used to send me messages, and she always used to she'd give her a news and then she'd end it by LOL plus her name. And it would be sometimes quite serious news. And I'm like, why is she writing LOL, like laugh out loud?
Right.
And then I figured out she meant lots of love.
Yep, I've heard that one. Yeah.
So there is this whole interpretation of emojis.
Yep.
Yeah.
And abbreviations and stuff. All right, Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Some really cool stuff about video etiquette. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.